This is Popular Front, a podcast focused on the niche details of modern warfare and underreported conflict with me, Jake Hanrahan. Today we're speaking to researcher Blake Vincent. He's also the co-founder of thefoldergap.com. Today he's going to be talking to us about the so-called ISIS-K that we've been hearing about in Afghanistan, specifically since they launched twin suicide bombing attacks on the Kabul airport. Blake is going to break it all down to us and explain exactly what the Islamic State cell in Afghanistan, ISIS-K, actually is. Support us at patreon.com/popularfront. First of all, let's talk about the ISIS-K suicide bombing on the Kabul airport. That was only like just over a week ago now. That's when, the media started kind of talking more about this ISIS-K branch in Afghanistan. Maybe just take us back to the attack and explain what happened.
Right. So we had asked the Taliban to create a perimeter around the airport where there were a bunch of Afghan citizens waiting to be evacuated. And there's a lot of speculation as to why security was as loose as it actually was and how that was even able to happen. So I don't want to get into making any accusations. But security was loose enough around the airport for that attack to even take place. And in the process, 13 U.S. service members and I think 169 Afghan citizens were murdered in the process. It was a very unfortunate situation. Preventable. Absolutely.
So ISIS-K, they managed to get in there. They launched two suicide attacks, and then all of a sudden, everyone was like, "Who is ISIS-K?" I mean, as we were just saying before we hit record, I mean, on Popular Front, we were talking about ISIS-K in 2018 even, but still, people are saying, "Wow, it's this new invention." It's not a new invention. It's been here for a while, right? Just explain to us, what is ISIS-K?
Right, and just to point out, ISIS-K is a bit of a misnomer.
Yeah.
As ISIS stands for Islamic State in Iraq and Syria, and K being Khorasan Province, which is a term from antiquity referring to northeastern Iran, Afghanistan, and a little bit of Pakistan.
How did they originate? Where do they start?
I'd say that the idea of Islamic State in Khorasan Province originated from the idea of the Taliban opening up to negotiations with the Afghan government back in 2013. It wasn't anything formal back in those days. In fact, it wasn't until really 2014 until the Islamic State name really started to coalesce in these breakaway groups. But some of the earliest defectors were from Al-Qaeda and the Pakistani Taliban. One of the original defectors from Al-Qaeda was actually Makdizi's brother, who was an ideologue from Al-Qaeda, and actually one of Al-Zarqawi, the founder of ISIS, mentors in prison in Jordan back in the 90s. So throughout 2014, as the Islamic State was gaining traction in Iraq and Syria, back then really only known as Islamic State in Iraq, and not really professed to be the Islamic State yet, they were still releasing a good amount of propaganda via the internet, and Taliban breakaway groups, Al-Qaeda members, and members of the Pakistani Taliban, the Tehrik-i Taliban, were seeing all of this media coming out of the area in Iraq and Syria and going like, I think that's what we need here. Because back in 2013, Mullah Omar, who would later die, and we wouldn't know that until 2050, and he was saying, we should start negotiations, or at least start thinking about it, and that wasn't really going well with certain more extreme breakaway groups. So at the same time, disgruntled Taliban commanders and their men defected to the IS movement, and one of the bigger attractions to that was definitely higher wages. The Taliban wasn't really paying their men that well, and in a lot of ways, the attraction was getting paid, was to carry out jihad and get paid for it. Because on the other hand, it was just sort of the Taliban is a domestic political, albeit terrorist movement. And the reward in and of itself for that was to have Afghanistan under Sharia law. But there were certain breakaway groups in the Taliban and Al-Qaeda and the Pakistani Taliban that were really not down with the idea of compromising.
Ideologically, then, how does ISIS-K and the Taliban differ, would you say?
Well, like I was saying, the Taliban is a domestic political movement. And that is actually how we as the United States and the Western world interact with them. And ISIS and the Islamic State and their branch in the Khorasan Province, they are an international Islamist terrorist group. So their aspirations inherently bring a split to their approach to implementing their different forms of Sharia, one being more intense than the other. The Taliban is known for carrying out punishments that are very severe, amputations and stuff like that. Not so much beheadings under Mullah Omar. It wasn't really until Hibatullah Akhundzada, sorry, where you saw more extreme violence carried out by the Taliban. But I'd say one of the big differences between the two groups is that and one of the appeals that brought a lot of members into ISIS-K was the fact that they will not compromise with the West. The Taliban has really taken steps, or at least by face value, to make compromises with the West. At this point, it's really a facade more than actual practice. But the fact that they were even meeting with Western diplomats in Doha in the last few years is really emblematic of some of the key differences between ISIS in Afghanistan and the Taliban.
Right, and what kind of capabilities does ISIS-K actually have?
ISIS membership in Afghanistan has really fluctuated massively. And between 2014 and today, there's a lot of arguments over whether they've had 5,000 members back in 2015, which is more of a consensus, and then in 2018, some people say that they had 600 to 800 members in the group, and then other people are saying that after the major offensive by the United States in 2017, it kind of ramped up their recruitment and gave them access to a lot more people. And people say upwards of 5,000 members. Yeah, I did want to talk about a little bit more of the history.
Yeah, sure.
If we can. So So just their recognition by Baghdadi. It was, I think, January 10th in 2015, where Baghdadi did recognize the group as part of ISIS, and a few weeks later, former Tehrik-i-Taliban Pakistan commander Khan Saeed became its leader. And after that, other TTP commanders followed suit and pretty much ceded TTP control of the federally administrated tribal areas, the FATA, which is a western sliver of Pakistan, basically de facto to ISIS-K or ISK influence. And at that point, provinces along the border with Pakistan and the FATA region, such as Kunar and Nangarhar, soon joined, and several ISIS cadres and cells cropped up in Jazjan, Helmand, and Farah and Zabul, which sort of seem like very distant regions. But that's just kind of how it turned out. But the major concentration of ISIS-K in Afghanistan did coalesce around Kunar and Nangarhar province, which is right on the border with Pakistan. So they were very much all over the country, but especially near the Pakistan border. And civilian populations were very forcefully put under ISIS-K influence and control in those provinces. Not to say that populations weren't forcefully put under Taliban rule in many places, and especially now. But ISIS-K was seen as a foreign force because a lot of the founding members of ISIS-K were former members and former commanders of the Pakistani Taliban. So ISIS in Afghanistan like to say that they were a domestic force. They were a force from within Afghanistan. But really, when local people were interviewed about ISIS presence in their villages, they were saying, no, these are foreigners. These are Uzbeks. These are Pakistanis, and there was a decent sprinkling of former Afghan Taliban and other Afghan nationals, but they were definitely seen as an outside force. But there are other supporters, included the Islamic movement of Uzbekistan, Al-Ansar ul Khalifat wal Jihad, Pakistani Jundullah, and Lashkar-e-Islam. And those are mostly, or rather all, foreign backers, or members that eventually were absorbed into ISK in Afghanistan.
Right, but the Taliban have been fighting with them as well, right? Like against them.
Yeah. And so what ended up happening is that with a lot of the tension within the Taliban itself, with the fact that there were negotiations happening between the West and the Afghan government and the Taliban, that coalesced into breakaway groups throughout Afghanistan. So in the West, you had Mullah Rasul and Mullah Dadullah, and those groups those breakaway groups from the Taliban in the western part of the country were a mixture of Afghan nationals, Taliban breakaway groups, and Uzbeks, which would come from the IMU, which is the Islamic movement of Uzbekistan. And in reaction to this like sudden and widespread epidemic of like Taliban breakaway groups pledging allegiance to ISIS, you had the Red Unit, which is a Taliban like special force that dealt with breakaway groups and then eventually specifically ISK. So they were deployed to deal with ISK in mostly Farah, Helmand, and Zabul provinces, which are sort of Farah and Helmand provinces are in the southwest of the country, and Zabul is in the southeast. The only province that makes the three provinces discontiguous is Uruzgan, which is sort of in the center of the country. And for a while, ISK was using their positioning in Zabul province to basically take control of the highway that connected Kabul with the rest of the country. And that was a major hindrance to Taliban control in that region. And so the Red Unit was sent to take care of that issue.
How connected is ISIS-K, Islamic State in Afghanistan? How connected are they to, ISIS as we know it in Iraq, in Syria?
Well, I mean, I think one thing to understand about the ISIS movement, I guess, is that there is an ISIS or an Islamic State branch pretty much anywhere where you can find extreme Islamist jihadist groups. So you have groups in Southeast Asia, you have groups in Northern Africa, you have groups in the Caucasus, and they pledge their allegiance to ISIS, and ISIS, will recognize that. But that doesn't necessarily always mean that they are very tightly connected. We can take an example of Al-Shabab. They are definitely focused upon in ISIS media releases, and ISIS will claim their violence and their victories as their own. But on the other hand, you do have ISIS-K, and they are definitely known to be more in the pocket of the Islamic State as we know it. Back in 2014 and 2015, there was a pretty great influx of foreign fighters into Western Pakistan and Nangarhar and Kunar provinces, and so that was a direct consequence of ISIS Central, I guess you could call it, sort of seeding influence and fighters into a region where they saw fit.
Right. So obviously this is ISIS-K then. There was a situation where there was the suicide bombing. Now there's even been kind of murmurings that various Western militaries will possibly team up with the Taliban to fight ISIS-K. Then there was some US airstrike that was meant to be targeting ISIS-K but ended up just killing a whole family, basically killing Afghan children, civilians, everything, kind of typical. How serious is ISIS-K? Do you think it's being blown out of proportion a little bit, or what?
I do think that ISK is being blown out of proportion in Afghanistan. I think at this point, they are trying to project an era of relevance, and that's what the attack at the airport in Kabul was. There was definitely a point at which they were a much larger threat, where the Taliban and ISK were actually fighting on the ground. There were thousands of ISK militants in Afghanistan that were fighting for territory, But ISK doesn't really have territory in Afghanistan anymore. They're very much underground, but they are continuing to plan and carry out high-profile attacks. So they're technically still dangerous. You know, they carry out attacks that I mean, at this point, have killed at least 190 people in one go. But over the past few years, in 2019, 2020, 2021, they've carried out attacks where, you know, 12, 20, 40 people are killed at a time. So it's not like they're fighting for territory anymore. They're fighting for relevancy. And the people who suffer for the fight for relevancy are slightly different than fighting on the ground against the Taliban or the United States. Because in this case, it's more everyday Afghans who are dying as a consequence of ISK violence.
Right. So going forward, do you think then that all of this kind of talk of ISIS-K was warranted?
I think that we should acknowledge events as they happen. But the fact that it was blown up in the media in the way that it was, as if, you know, the U.S. Moab bombing in 2017 wasn't a direct consequence of the fight against ISIS in Afghanistan, and as if there's something very new and something very pressing, I think that was unwarranted. I think that the media could have provided a lot more context. I think President Biden himself, in addressing the attacks, he could have done it much differently, because he himself made it sound like a new threat. It might have been new to him.
I think every hour that passes is fucking new to him, but yeah.
So, yeah, I think that it's complicated, wherein we should be able to acknowledge events as they happen, and it was an attack carried out by ISK or ISIS-K or whatever you want to call them. But the fact that we have this collective amnesia about what's going on in a region where we've been at war for 20 years is just very strange. I even saw the other day an article reminiscent of the "Who is ISIS-K? What is ISIS-K?" which was even part of the my article's title. There was an article talking about who is the Taliban and why should we be concerned about their role in Afghanistan, and I just found that astounding.
What, like a new article?
Yeah.
Jesus Christ. You just lost the war to them and people are going, who are they? It's sad, actually, yeah.
Well, it's just the fact that it's become so commonplace. The war itself has sort of faded into the background, and it's only every once in a while that we have these like big, high-profile, flashy news articles, such as, you know, the mother of all bombs being used in 2017, or the most recent ISK attack at the airport in Kabul. It's you know, we get these big news flashes, people create a big hubbub around them, and then it just sort of fades into the background, and it really doesn't stay relevant in the public's mind, which is unfortunate, because, you know, there are people like you and me and that watch this stuff happening on a daily basis, and we don't forget.
Yeah, neither do the people that get fucking killed by these groups either. Yeah, it's fucked up. No, it is like, look, I know not everybody has the time to like read up on war stuff and whatever, but like, I mean, Jesus Christ, there are lads getting sent from your country to fight in these wars, and people are still going, who is it? Who is the Taliban? I don't know. It just seems weird to me. Another thing that seems kind of outrageous now we've been speaking about it is the fact that there are Western countries that have come out and said, yeah, we might actually help the Taliban fight ISIS-K. Like, there just seems no need for that. It seems ridiculous. What do you think?
I think that is a giant risk to take.
Yeah.
Mostly because ISK has really never been a direct threat to Western countries, the U.S. I mean, even countries that get struck like France and the UK by ISIS attacks or ISIS-inspired attacks. That's just what they are. They're ISIS-inspired attacks for the most part. You know, they're not sending people over from Khorasan Province to go bomb someone in the United States. They're depending on people who have either returned from conflict to carry out those attacks, or people that are just starting to get acquainted with this with extremism where they are. So I think that taking the risk of using the Taliban as a proxy against ISIS-K is just, it doesn't need to happen. It doesn't need to happen. And also, who's to say that the Taliban is going to give us correct information? You know, there's absolutely the possibility that the Taliban uses Western military might for their own benefit. And, you know, to be fair, using it against ISIS-K would be to their benefit, but I can't say for certain that they would be truthful about that 100% of the time.
Yeah, no, I agree. And there's also a situation where I know that sometimes the Taliban just let ISIS-K members go. There was a guy that I know that actually ended up interviewing some like ISIS-K, and they were like in the custody of the Taliban. They'd found them. They had a short battle, arrested some of them. Some of them, I'm sure, were like executed. But some of the kind of lower level guys, the Taliban just said to them, "Look, do you promise to stop this?" And they're like, "Yeah, we do." And they're like, "Okay, off you go." Like, I'm not bullshitting you. Like, this actually happened. This guy I know, a very reliable journalist, was with them when it happened. And, you know, they kind of sent them off. They took their guns from them and they were like, "Right, off you go." And it's like, well, you know, the idea that you just trust these guys to go, you know what, we'll stop now. Like, it's just, it doesn't seem like there's much organization there. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I feel like it also might be the idea of amnesty might be part of setting former or current ISIS members, letting them go, where, you know, we're the Taliban, we're showing you compassion. Please don't, you know, please don't be ISIS anymore. Goodbye. It's irresponsible. And I don't really know if they're being altruistic in taking that action. But yeah, that's I can't really say, you know, here or there if they're doing that to, you know, release more chaos and therefore sort of getting to project more power, you know, telling the people of Afghanistan, hey, we're saving you from ISK, you know, allow us to be in power and we'll...
Ironically enough, that's a very Western thing to do. You know, like, there's a threat. I mean, as soon as it's like, oh, we're tanking in the polls, let's have a war. You know what I mean? It's kind of a similar thing.
Yeah, I mean, you know, we also saw that in Syria, where Assad, you know, he's letting a bunch of known extremists go, so that he can say, oh, there's a bunch of ISIS members on the loose. There's a bunch of jihadists on the loose. Gotta take care of them.
Yeah, and then now you have the fucking narrative where people are like, yeah, Assad defeated the jihadists. It's like, mate, he let them out. Like, you know what I mean? He set his own house on fire, for fuck's sake. Is there anything else you wanna talk about in regards to ISIS-K?
I guess part of the research that I was doing about a year ago, my concern was, as the negotiations between the Taliban, the Afghan government, and the United States got a little more serious and got a little more detailed, with with what the stipulations for peace were and everything, and the compromises that the Taliban was promising to make at the time, obviously not carrying through. What would that do for ISK recruitment? And I don't really think it had a large effect on ISIS recruitment in Afghanistan. However, it did influence the amount of high-profile attacks that occurred. A year ago, I was very concerned that it would influence an uptick in recruitment from various extremist groups in the region. Some that are classically predisposed to be absorbed into ISK, or just everyday Afghans like looking to get a semblance of control over their country. But it really turned out that it was the effect of the peace talks and the negotiations was really just sort of ISK really grasping at straws in terms of high profile attacks. Tens of people would die at a time for what? They don't have territory to gain. They've been pushed out of everywhere where they had a stronghold. Even in the east of the country along the Pakistani border, they're completely pushed out of their enclaves. They're very much pushed underground. So I think that one thing that we will see is ISK continuing to carry out high-profile, high-casualty attacks and very, very pointed and direct attacks on Afghan officials or former Afghan officials. And now that the Taliban is taking control of the country, we'll see a lot more assassination attempts and so on and so forth.
Yeah, man. I don't think it's going to be improving much. Where can people get hold of you, mate, and find your research and read what you've been doing?
Yeah, I'm pretty active on Twitter nowadays. I'm Cold War Crush there. And I also have the website, thefoldagap.com. That's FULDAGAP, the Foldagap. Where my colleague Aram Shabanian and I periodically post bits of research. We also have articles that help people out with open source research, stuff like that. So yeah,
man. Still got the best handle on Twitter, Cold War Crush. Definitely check him out. All right, mate. Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Yeah, of course.
That was Blake Vincent, researcher, talking about the so-called ISIS-K group, or the Islamic State in the Khorasan Province in Afghanistan. Very interesting. Check out his site at thefoldagap.com, thefoldagap.com. If you like what we're doing here at Popular Front and you want to support us and get more, go to patreon.com/popularfront, or you can go to popularfront.co/support. This episode was sponsored by Oracle Coffee Shop in Portland, Oregon, USA. They're an independent coffee business selling only fair trade products. See them at 3875 South West Bond Avenue 97239. The episode was also sponsored by Grindcore House, a pair of independent coffee shops in Philadelphia, USA, one in South, one in West. Find them on social media at Grindcore House. The episode was also sponsored by Propagandopolis, an outlet selling and writing about historical conflict propaganda from around the world. Buy prints at propagandopolis.com. Use the promo code POPULARFRONT10 for 10% off. And there's also a range of Popular Front posters on there. If you go to the website propagandopolis.com, you'll see it on the header there. If you want to follow us on social media, Instagram at popular.front, Twitter at popularfrontco, youtube.com/popularfront. That's where all our documentaries are. We put the podcast episodes up there as well for the YouTube. Getting them all uploaded, it's a long process, but anyway, if you want to follow me, it's just at Jake_Hanrahan, HANRAHAN. My website, jakehanrahan.com. Music in this episode, the intro was by Home and the outro was by Sam Black. Hear his music at samblackpf.com. If you want to support us, like I said, go to patreon.com/popularfront. Thank you to the higher tier Patreons. They are Elise Middlefat, Jess Lewis, David McManus, Joachim Williamson Holt, Yidoy Travis, sorry if I've pronounced that wrong, Tom Petrie, James Lyons, Kate, Lisa Milgram, Bradley Davies, Brendan Crave, Pete Hesher, RX, A. Nicole, Travis Lieberman, Cherry, Ben Marshall, Dallas Dunn, LD50 Seattle, MJ, Meredith Waters, Bethany Swoveland, Adam H, Larson 8669, Karante, Bjorn Kirsten, Diamondstein, Michael O'Connor, Zach Picard, Todd Cravens, Nicholas Butter, Ron Swanson, JD, Jav, Ian Froese, James Cully, Tynan Daly, Ethan Fitzmadrid, Ed Coulthard, Mike Barone, Ben, Liam Williams, Chris Cusimano, Degenerate Zero Alpha, Giorgio Arani, DR, Trey Nance, Amy R, Rubicon, Frank Austin, Amelia Me, Nawaiz, Nate Van Dor, Christina Rivetti, Freya Northman, Ali Hunter, Moody Al Rashid, Bill Wilson, Andrew Hurley, Vida Provost, Brian McLaughlin, Tom Lochrin, Young Wasabi, Tony Bin, Adam Bergsnyder, JL, Stephen Davila, Anthony Kabarek, Dan Dunham, Fletcher, Chad Walker, Diana Gorvanek, Lawrence Abrams, Peter McCormick from What Bitcoin Did, Axel Iverson, Christopher Martin, Ryan Sandercock, and Maurice Zumbel. Thank you all so much. They are the higher tier patrons. Like I said, if you want to support us, patreon.com/popularfront. There's loads extra for you there, and you help fund Popular Front.